Our entitled neighbor from hell tried to steal our house through lies and manipulation. But karma hit hard when her own sneaky actions backfired, leaving her slapped with a devastating $200,000 bill and a legal nightmare she never saw coming. Before we begin, let's introduce our main personalities. The woman often referred to as the entitled neighbor will now be known as Anne. Her spoiled son will be addressed as Simon. We'll also feature the previous owner of our residence, whom we'll call Phil, though his involvement in this narrative is somewhat limited. Please keep in mind that almost 15 years elapsed between our purchase of the house and the present day. Therefore, unless specified otherwise, you can generally assume a significant time gap between most occurrences. Now, let's get into the story. To properly set the scene and build towards the main event, I need to provide some preliminary information. Much of this transpired before we acquired and moved into this home, and owned a vast tract of land situated a short distance from a well-known recreational lake in our region. When I say a short distance, it's actually quite a way off, despite the road and resides on being the sole route to multiple lakefront properties, resorts, and the most frequented boat dock on this side of the lake. While the properties here aren't prohibitively expensive for ordinary individuals, there are indeed some incredibly valuable estates further down the road, with affluent people frequently passing by. This detail will become pertinent later. And, being quite affluent and possessing a substantial landholding, eventually divided her property into 4 roughly equal sections once her children reached adulthood. One portion she gifted to her daughter, who, surprisingly, is a rather pleasant individual given the rest of her family. Another section she allocated to Simon. She constructed homes for them on both parcels, largely adhering to her children's preferences. On the 4th segment of property, which did not contain her own dwelling, she erected a modest convenience store. This, too, will be relevant later. I'm uncertain why, perhaps to avert potential future conflicts. She actually transferred the deeds for their respective houses and properties to her children. You can likely anticipate where this is headed. While her daughter was quite respectable, Simon, or perhaps I should rename him the irresponsible son, was an ardent partygoer. Everyone in the vicinity at the time thoroughly disliked him. He would host boisterous, late-night gatherings almost nightly, disturbing the peace. The police, it seems, had a consistent presence nearby, as they were summoned to his residence so frequently. His sense of entitlement was likely exacerbated by his mother covering all his expenses. Water, electricity, garbage, everything was registered in her name and delivered to her mailbox. All, that is, except for one bill. Since the property was legally in his name, so was the property tax, which he never forwarded to and simply disregarded. I suppose and either didn't consider it or assumed he was managing it himself. Regardless, it wasn't a shock when law enforcement arrived at his door, but it certainly was when he didn't return and the house was put up for auction. At that juncture, the house was in disarray, holes in the drywall, and even the living room floor featured a massive opening leading directly into the garage/basement. The kitchen floor and subfloor required complete replacement. Nearly all the walls were covered in grime. Essentially, his recklessness and party lifestyle left the house in a condition the banks deemed uninhabitable. Consequently, only those who could afford an out-of-pocket purchase could acquire it. Enter Phil. Phil was a house renovator, not one of the prominent, wealthy figures seen on television, but rather a hobbyist. He was retired and flipped houses to stay occupied and active. Phil would purchase a property like this one, incredibly cheap at auction, repair it himself, then relist it. While he worked on a house, he would subsist on the profits from the previous one, and typically, by the time he finished one renovation and acquired the next, his earnings would be nearly depleted. Any leftover funds went into an emergency savings account, which he claimed was nothing extraordinary. We, meanwhile, were seeking a new residence but couldn't afford anything overly expensive within our budget. However, when we discovered this place listed online, it appeared ideal. It was the perfect size, in the perfect neighborhood, and even close to the lake, where we enjoy fishing and boating. So, it seemed flawless in almost every respect, or at least it looked that way. We were apprehensive about the price, which wasn't yet disclosed online, but decided it wouldn't hurt to at least take a look. We drove by to observe it, and found Phil working there. We paused to greet him and inquired about the price. He explained his intention to renovate and sell it, and that his realtor had simply uploaded it to the website's database to streamline the process for when it was genuinely ready for sale. We sat down and had a pleasant conversation with him, simply being cordial, and he appreciated the company. We expressed our willingness to purchase it from him at a fair price, considering its current state and the effort he had already invested. He had it approximately halfway completed. We explained our desire to finish it and reside there permanently. He declined our offer, stating he already had several propositions and didn't feel right selling it to us then, suggesting we could buy it at full price once he was done. We politely thanked him and left our contact information, asking him to call if he ever reconsidered, which he promised he would. Less than 2 weeks later, we received an unexpected call from him. He explained that his sister had become ill in another state, and he wished to be with her, lacking the time or patience to complete the house. He clarified that the house did not meet current building codes, but if we could arrange its purchase, he would gladly sell it to us at a reasonable rate. We readily agreed and began contacting banks. Through a realtor friend, we had a few connections who helped us locate a bank willing to lend the funds for the house purchase, albeit with certain conditions. Essentially, we would have 2 weeks to bring the house up to code. Otherwise, they could default on the loan and auction it. After explaining the predicament to Phil, he offered to assist as much as possible. He couldn't physically work on the house due to his rush, but he precisely outlined what we needed to do to meet the minimum code requirements, the time and effort it would demand, and the estimated cost. He even offered another form of assistance. We secured a loan for twice what he actually desired for the house, and he returned half to us. We utilized that money for the repairs. Given the work he had already completed, the house was so close to meeting code that we likely could have managed it ourselves. But just to be safe, we enlisted some friends, and it was finished in half the time. However, even after getting it up to code, significant work remained. We spent several months replacing flooring and subflooring, rewiring electrical systems, patching wall holes, and removing old, literally deteriorating wallpaper that was directly adhered to the drywall. You understand the extent of our labor. We poured immense effort into the property. Finally, it was time to move into our dream home. A few minor issues persisted, which we planned to address later, but the moment had arrived to settle in. We hadn't even finished relocating when Anne approached to introduce herself. While we were sorting things out with Phil during our limited time frame, he had repeatedly cautioned us about and in her entitled demeanor. Initially, Anne was exceptionally pleasant, and we couldn't fathom why Phil had warned us so intensely about her. Then it happened. As we concluded our discussion, she informed us, in a very polite and empathetic manner, that our house actually belonged to her and that we had 30 days to vacate. She expressed sympathy for us, believing we had been severely scammed, but insisted it was her house, and Phil had no right to sell it to us whatsoever. We had heard terrifying stories of people being defrauded in such ways, so you can imagine our panic when she conveyed all this. We were horrified that we had invested so much time, effort, and money into this dream home, only to lose it instantly because we had fallen victim to some individual's trickery. We thanked her for her explanation and her kindness, stating we would consult with the bank and Phil to resolve the matter. And that's precisely what we did. We spoke to the bank, who confirmed Phil was the legitimate owner of the deed. Our realtor also attested to the same. We conversed with Phil, who explained that Anne had repeatedly accused him of stealing the house after he purchased it at auction, and that she incessantly harassed him over the property. Everyone we spoke to recounted the identical story. We even visited the courthouse and verified that our name was on the deed. It was during this process that we learned Simon's backstory from several neighbors, and visited not long after this and inquired when she could expect us to vacate. We explained that would never occur, as we legally owned the property, and Simon's loss of it was not our fault. We expressed our apologies for her loss and conveyed our understanding that losing family property due to her son's negligence was likely very difficult, but it was not our responsibility, and we wouldn't simply hand over a property we acquired with our own hard-earned money and diligently restored. And, realizing we were aware of the situation, launched into a lengthy sob story about how this property had been in her family for generations, how she couldn't bear to lose it, and how Phil had stolen it from them amidst the chaos of her child's arrest. We asked why they didn't bid on the house and buy it back after he lost it, considering we bought it from Phil for only about $50,000, and he still made a small profit even after his work and materials. They could have easily bought it for next to nothing at auction and reclaimed it, and explained that she felt the house and property were being stolen from them, and they refused to pay for something that rightfully belonged to them. We apologized once more but reiterated that there was no way we would incur a loss on the property, especially after all the time, effort, and additional materials we invested, simply to appease her. However, we were sympathetic to her circumstances and offered to sell the house to her at a very reasonable price, $100,000. Considering its location and its renovated state, this was still just over half of its total market value. After purchasing it from Phil for $50,000 and investing an additional $30,000 in materials, plus months of demanding labor to fix it up, we believe that was a very fair price. We didn't mention it, but we would have even been willing to go down to $90,000 if she wanted to negotiate. She immediately counteroffered with $40,000, asserting she shouldn't have to pay anything at all for something that rightfully belonged to her. When we stated that was far too low, she responded by saying she understood our effort and material costs, and that she would be generous and add an extra $10,000 for our work on the house. When we informed her that $50,000 was what we paid Phil for the house, she became agitated, accusing us of being liars and thieves, claiming the house was a complete dump, and there was no way it was worth that much. Not only had she resorted to insults at this point, but going as far as to call our dream home a dump after all the blood, sweat, tears, and money we poured into it. We were finished with her nonsense. We politely asked her to leave our house, explaining she was no longer welcome and that we would never sell our house to her, even if she offered double the market value. She obviously became enraged and hurled all sorts of disparaging remarks at us as she departed. Later, we discovered she was circulating all kinds of falsehoods about us throughout the neighborhood, claiming we stole the house from her and other absurdities. Initially, we disregarded it, believing no one would actually believe such things. Then, a man pulled into our driveway, armed with a gun, threatening us to leave immediately. We had never encountered him before, but we had heard of him. He apparently considered himself the neighborhood's peacemaker, confronting anyone who caused issues like this. Most residents in our area actually liked him, describing him as a fairly reasonable person, and in our very rural neighborhood, where many less law-abiding citizens reside, most people greatly valued his presence. He genuinely worked hard to maintain peace in the neighborhood and often accomplished far more than the police. Just a note, our neighborhood is divided into two primary areas. One section is mostly populated by elderly, retired individuals. It's very pleasant and tranquil, and everyone coexists. The other is home to the less law-abiding crowd, further into the wilderness and away from prying eyes. We live at the edge of the peaceful part, separated by about a mile of woodland and farmland. So, having heard about him previously and assuming, based on descriptions, that this was the same individual, we decided to test that theory. We told him we had no idea what was transpiring and invited him in for a beer and a conversation. We permitted him to bring his firearm, but informed him we would also be bringing our own. Almost everyone in our town possesses a gun. There are more gun stores than dollar stores, if that tells you anything. So, we weren't genuinely concerned about him having a weapon. It doesn't signify much in our town. It's simply a way of saying, hey, I'm capable of defending myself if this escalates. Now, if someone pointed it at you, which he did not, that would be a different situation. Back to the main narrative. He agreed, and after a few hours of talking and our explanation of the circumstances, he clarified that he had suspected something similar and apologized for the misunderstanding. He explained he got swept up in the rumors and reacted impulsively, assuring us it wouldn't happen again. He also thanked us for purchasing the property, explaining that everyone was much happier after Simon moved out. He no longer had to endure complaints about loud music and intoxicated teenagers stumbling down the middle of the road in the dead of night, nearly getting hit. We all shared a good laugh afterward, and he departed without another word. Now, for the reason why Mr. Peacekeeper so readily believed the initial rumor. This is a bit of a digression, but it's also a crucial turning point, when everything began to unravel for Anne. I also want to add that the events of this side story do slightly overlap with the next part of the narrative, but let's proceed. I mentioned that Anne allocated a quarter of her property to construct a convenience store. This establishment was exceptionally popular in the neighborhood, being centrally located and therefore in a perfect spot. Its popularity wasn't due to competitive pricing. In fact, they significantly overcharged for everything. Nor was it due to exceptional customer service, which primarily consisted of a thank you for your purchase as you exited. Occasionally, they would offer a refund if you discovered mold on your food, which was a minor plus, I suppose. Regardless, their immense popularity stemmed from being the sole convenience store for miles. If you needed groceries and wished to avoid a long drive into town, they were just a stone's throw away from most people. We even set aside our differences and shopped there frequently. After all, they were literally next door. Beyond that, the store's popularity allowed them to build a strong, positive reputation in the community. Everyone desired to preserve their convenient little shop and would challenge anyone attempting to disrupt it. I can somewhat understand that sentiment, and this was back when everyone perceived Anne and her family as generally good people. So, when Anne began circulating rumors, people tended to listen. The rumors about us stealing an entire house from her quickly dissipated because everyone recognized their absurdity, but for the most part, people still trusted her. Other rumors, and believe me, there were many, were mostly minor, petty matters that no one ever paid attention to. Let me just say that even if all the rumors about us were true, far more could be said about other individuals in our neighborhood, so no one ever gave them much thought. They did, however, avoid us, considering and had an obvious conflict with us, and no one wanted to be on her bad side for fear of being barred from her store. They simply ignored us and left us to our own devices. After a few years, however, Simon was finally released from prison, having nowhere else to go, and permitted him to move back in. She disliked the idea of him residing with her, so she rented him an apartment above her convenience store and strictly prohibited any wild parties on her property ever again. He didn't actually have to pay rent. His sole responsibility was to manage the store when they were occupied with other matters, which wasn't even very often. However, even after all these events, Simon evidently did not learn his lesson. While operating the register, he would frequently overcharge for items and pocket the extra cash. We discovered this several times in return for refunds. Their consistent excuse was that the register was malfunctioning. After noticing a pattern, however, we brought this to Anne's attention, informing her that her son was double charging customers and likely keeping the surplus. Although Anne was quite entitled, even she wouldn't go so far as to commit something so obviously illegal, and we appreciated her small store and didn't want anything to jeopardize it. However, instead of thanking us for bringing this to her attention, she told us we were imagining things and, in a very pleasant way, told us to go away. So, we very politely complied with her request. We also shared the information with some of our acquaintances in the neighborhood. It had taken years to reach a point where some of them would even look at us, let alone speak to us, thanks to but we had finally forged some friendships. Bringing holiday treats to your neighbors annually is a good way to brighten someone's day. Anyway, they thanked us, though they admitted they didn't truly believe it. However, the word quickly spread through the neighborhood. Then, very swiftly, Mr. Peacekeeper arrived. He pulled into our driveway again, this time much friendlier. He largely disregarded the rumors about us, knowing most were fabricated, and we had actually spoken to him several times since then, mostly on friendly terms rather than serious matters. He would stop by for a drink occasionally and just chat about neighborhood happenings, asking for our input on a few things. He did this with everyone, speaking to most people at least once a year to stay informed and ensure everything remained pleasant and calm. He disliked the presence of police and so resolved to do their job more effectively to avoid their need. Everyone, including us, genuinely appreciated this arrangement. It meant you could allow your children to walk unaccompanied to the lake, even through the less reputable parts of the neighborhood. That being said, he absolutely disapproved of the rumors we were spreading about our neighbors, especially their little shop. He explained he had already spoken to them, and they considered it merely a misunderstanding due to register issues, and if we wished to avoid trouble, we would cease those rumors immediately. We wanted to provide him with proof, but we knew he likely wouldn't believe it. He genuinely liked, and would generally accept her word over ours, and since they dismissed it as a register error, there was probably nothing we could do to persuade him. So, we agreed and apologized for any problems, explaining that we simply felt wronged and sincerely wished to protect the few friends we had made in the neighborhood. He accepted that apology, issuing one final warning, and departed without much more to say. So, we simply complied and decided to avoid shopping there unless absolutely necessary. But everything changed after a couple more years. After we had pointed it out and the rumors had circulated throughout the neighborhood, even though Mr. Peacekeeper himself had gone around telling everyone they were false rumors initiated by us due to our property dispute with, and I'll get to that later, people actually began scrutinizing their receipts after shopping there and started observing the same patterns we had. Over this period, Simon likely pocketed considerable sums of money and indefinitely knew about it, but chose to do nothing, simply attempting to silence people with rumors. However, the nature of small country stores like that is their complete reliance on their regular customers living in the neighborhood where they are located. During the warmer months, when people are vacationing and enjoying themselves, they generate substantial profits, but not enough to sustain themselves through the winter. And then it happened. Mr. Peacekeeper finally connected the dots, and he was furious. We could hear him all the way next door, berating Simon directly, with and present. You cannot imagine how gratifying that was. But that was only the beginning. Not only did he unleash on them, but he also went door to door that same day, informing every single person in the neighborhood exactly what they were doing, even carrying a stack of receipts to show anyone who wanted proof. Now, if there was anyone in the neighborhood more trusted than Anne, it was Mr. Peacekeeper. Within 24 hours, he had completely devastated their business. Everyone in the neighborhood ceased patronizing the store. They still fared reasonably well during the summer months due to vacationers and winter birds who were unaware, but when winter arrived and those crowds vanished, they began losing money rapidly. After 2 winters, they were compelled to close their store for the colder months. However, that also meant they had to discard over 90% of their inventory each fall and repurchase it all fresh every spring. I suppose doing that wasn't very economical, so they eventually permanently closed shop after 3 more years. That's when their standing in the neighborhood began to plummet, and thanks to that, people actually started respecting us more, and we were genuinely able to make friends without having to exert an immense amount of extra effort. People stopped ignoring us and treating us as if we carried a plague. But that was merely the beginning of Anne's decline. Unfortunately, to reach the climax of the story, I need to provide a bit more background. Apologies that this is starting to resemble a short novel, but this shouldn't take too long, I believe. One characteristic of Anne is her extreme nosiness. We cannot even step outside without her observing our every movement through her window, or going outdoors to walk her dog, tend to her lawn, pull weeds, or whatever excuse she can contrive at the moment. You can pretty much guarantee that if we are moving about our property, she is also outside. It's not that we have anything to conceal, but we are obviously not on the best terms with her and genuinely dislike being watched in everything we do. We intend to install a small pool and hot tub in our backyard, and certainly do not wish to be observed while relaxing in our swimsuits. So, we began looking into a privacy fence. Desiring to be good neighbors, we politely informed Anne that we would be erecting a fence, to which she adamantly objected. We informed her that we would indeed be installing a privacy fence. However, we still had to coexist with her, so we offered to discuss the fence's details, its color, design, and so forth. We wanted to ensure she didn't have to gaze at something she considered an eyesore all day, every day, especially since staring at our property seemed to be her favorite pastime. Honestly, we still go out of our way to be the best neighbors we can be, even after all the difficulties she has put us through. But back to the narrative. We wanted to ensure there were no disputes about the fence's placement, so we planned to install it 1 foot inside our property line, spanning the entire boundary, simply to avoid any arguments. Incidentally, this was before Simon was incarcerated. We visited the courthouse and acquired a copy of our deed along with a map of our property lines. We were genuinely astonished to discover that approximately 1/3 of our property was being claimed by Anne. She had a small shed on it, and even a garden. You see, there's actually a line of trees that traverses our property. It's not a straightforward rectangular property like you find in some states. It's more of a half hexagon or a trapezoidal shape. Unusual property lines are quite common where I reside. Anyway, there's a line of trees that cuts through a portion of our property, which, according to the deed and property map, forms a small triangular section, but the trees make it appear square, and was claiming the other side of these trees as her own property. When we raised this with her, she completely lost her temper again, calling us liars and thieves and uttering all sorts of other insults. We weren't overly concerned about that specific piece of property because we had lived there for years believing it was hers. So, to simplify things for everyone, we offered to sell it to her or even trade it for a portion of her property. There was a part of her land that connected with ours that was extremely inconvenient to maintain, and extending our boundary a little would genuinely make it easier to manage, not to mention providing us more space for our desired activities. She flatly refused, stating she would never pay for something that already belonged to her, and she wouldn't even contemplate giving us her property for nothing, especially after we had already stolen this property from her. Since then, a major ongoing property dispute has existed between us. Now, regarding my location, as I mentioned previously, it's a very rural area with many peculiar property lines, and often, property boundaries are not clear-cut. Many deeds are centuries old, and instead of specifying X feet in Y direction, they utilize temporary landmarks like large oak tree to large rock next to stream. Many of these landmarks could refer to multiple features or might have vanished over 100 years ago. So, to say that there are numerous property disputes in our area would probably be an understatement. That, coupled with the fact that a very small portion of land can sometimes fetch a significant amount of money, has led our state to enact very strict laws and regulations governing property disputes, surveyors, and so forth. As a side note, just a few years ago, a landowner won a property dispute against a very large corporation over just 0.1 acres of land, which cost the corporation and earned the man over $1 million. Returning to the main point, all that being said, our property lines were quite unambiguous since Anne herself recently created them. However, that doesn't alter the fact that the laws regarding them are very strict, particularly concerning surveyors. Thus, a surveyor might easily be swayed by a large corporation facing the loss of millions of dollars for a tiny piece of land, as in the example above, but that's unfair to the legitimate landowner. So, how do you account for that? You make it so the surveyor has everything to lose from dishonesty, and so does the person who offered the bribe or blackmail. The laws in our state dictate that if a surveyor, even by honest error, provides an inaccurate survey by even a few feet, not only can they incur a substantial fine, but they will also lose their license and be permanently prohibited from surveying in the state. Furthermore, they must notify and refund all their clients for up to 10 years prior to the incident. These clients then have the option to request an additional survey by an unaffiliated surveyor at the expense of the original surveyor. That applies to every customer for up to 10 years before the incident and everyone since then. If they were not found to have accepted a bribe or blackmail, then the previous clients can also sue them for any damages caused by any changes to the property line due to their faulty survey, as well as charging them appropriate rent for any property the surveyor may have omitted during that time. If a surveyor was found to have accepted a bribe or blackmail, then all damages and additional fees are directed toward the individual who bribed or blackmailed them. This, combined with the loss of time and money from legal proceedings and the general inconvenience caused to them, ensures that surveyors in my area actively avoid anything that even resembles a property dispute. So, when a dispute arose, you can imagine it wasn't as simple as making a phone call and securing a surveyor to come here. It was also an unexpected expense. Unfortunately, before we could secure someone and found a surveyor, and I assumed she bribed them or something, because they drew the property line exactly as and described it. Well, except for one small detail. She didn't like, which I guess she didn't mention to them. Our property apparently extends to about a foot from her house. That was amusing to play around with, but it was nothing compared to the property she is literally attempting to steal from us now. Whenever we manage to find a surveyor, she always seems to casually introduce herself to them and mention that she has already had her portion of the property surveyed, throwing in a few subtle hints that a property dispute might be involved. This instantly frightens away anyone who might be interested in surveying our property after they understand what that could entail for them. I'm sure you comprehend why. Oh, did I neglect to mention that the land markers from the bank surveyor when we purchased the property conveniently vanished before we actually moved in? No. Well, they did, somehow. I wonder how that happened. Guess we'll never know. Anyway, at this point, it would probably cost us as much as that piece of land is worth, or perhaps even more, to actually hire a surveyor, if we can even find someone willing to do it. Everyone we've found so far has provided absolutely exorbitant quotes for obvious reasons. I mean, they are essentially risking their entire livelihoods. But we are currently saving up to try and hire someone, and that brings us to just a few months ago, the climax of this story. Apologies for the lengthy background, but let's get to the main event now that we are fully caught up on the current situation. So, a few months ago, a severe storm struck, which resulted in a tree on the disputed property falling. This tree was actually right next to the road, so when it toppled, it damaged a portion of our other neighbor's property, the one living across the street from us. That's not all. It also completely destroyed someone's brand new sports car while they were driving down the street. Thankfully, no one was injured during any of this, but the cleanup took several days, just enough time for us to receive a bill in the mail for over $200,000. Literally more than our house and property were worth after we renovated it. This is where malicious compliance comes in. Just a little more context for anyone who might be unfamiliar. Most property or home insurance policies typically do not cover damages to other people's property. That responsibility usually falls on you. And even if someone is on public property like a road, if your property damages theirs, and you could have reasonably prevented it, for example, by felling a tree near the road before it collapsed in a severe storm, then you are entirely accountable for the resulting damages. At least, that's how it operates where I live. So, when we received the bill in the mail from an unknown wealthy individual's insurance company for their totaled sports car, we contacted them and very politely informed them that the fallen tree was not on our property. They asked us a few questions and stated they would investigate the matter and get back to us. About a week later, we received another letter from the insurance company with a copy of the deed and the property line printout, with the tree in question circled in red, clearly indicating it was on our property. They were demanding full payment within 30 days of their first notice, or they would initiate legal action. That was roughly 2 weeks, give or take, at this point. We called them again and reiterated that it was not on our property. Initially, the agent debated with us a little, explaining, in much nicer terms than I will use, that someone would have to be utterly senseless to believe the tree in question was not on our property, and that no matter how inaccurate the property line on the printout might be, it would be entirely impossible for anyone to be foolish enough to believe it was that far off. We simply provided them with the contact information for the surveyor and had hired. They sighed, stating they would contact the surveyor and investigate the matter further, but reiterated that we had about 2 weeks to prepare the payment if what we were saying could not be corroborated. We never heard back from them again. Remember the repercussions I mentioned for providing false survey results? Even if the surveyor admitted to accepting a bribe, there was no way they paid him enough to compensate for all his potential losses. He would likely have to flee the country at this point. So, there was no chance he would give the insurance company anything different from what he gave us, or Anne. We called the insurance company later to inquire about the issue. The agent seemed quite pleased while reviewing their notes. They couldn't disclose too much due to confidentiality, but they could inform us that and obviously disputed the claim, just as we did, asserting the property did not belong to her, and that the surveyor confirmed the results with them. Considering we were not disputing the survey results, and that the surveyor was hired by Anne herself, there was absolutely no reason for the insurance company to believe the results were false. As long as we weren't disputing the results, then the full responsibility for all damages caused by the fallen tree should fall on Anne. They couldn't say anything more than that, though. We were satisfied with that much. It was about what we anticipated. The aftermath, as you can probably infer from my background story, and didn't have a significant problem paying the money to the insurance company, though they were clearly displeased about it. We don't know how much money they have or had saved, but it seems it was enough to settle it without having to sell any more of their land. Since then, we've mostly remained silent about the property dispute, but we are still considering saving up to hire a surveyor to reclaim our land. At this point, it's more about the principle of the matter than the actual land. As for Anne, however, we can tell whenever she looks at us now that she is definitely not pleased with us. She doesn't seem to like the fact that we let her have our land for some reason. It's free land. How can you complain about that, haha? At this point, she could try to spread rumors about us, but it would likely backfire, as we've made friends with a substantial portion of our neighborhood, and nobody trusts Anne any longer since they discovered Simon was literally stealing from everyone in the neighborhood right under their noses, and she knew about it and did nothing to stop it, and is essentially caught between a rock and a hard place at this juncture, and we're just sitting back and observing the fires they started consume them. Can't wait to see what happens next. Oh, this is just a little extra for anyone who wants some added amusement. While we were contemplating a privacy fence, we decided to install an invisible dog fence for our dogs. For anyone unfamiliar with this, it's a small electrical wire buried underground. You then attach a special collar to the dog's neck. If they get too close, it emits a beep that dogs truly dislike. If they persist, it applies a very mild shock to the dogs. We don't believe in shock collars, so we had to be persuaded first, and one of us actually held it and walked across the line. It was something you could feel, but it didn't truly hurt. It just left you feeling a little tingly. Anyway, you're actually supposed to condition the dogs to the beep before simply letting them loose with it. So ideally, they would never even experience the shock in the first place. They would just hear the beep and turn around. We tried to do this so we could let our dogs roam our yard and not be confined indoors all day, but at the time, we couldn't afford an actual privacy fence yet. We installed it well within our property, partly because it wasn't that long and also because we wanted to prevent our dogs from getting anywhere near Anne's property. And must have thought we were marking where we intended to put our privacy fence or something, because she accidentally ran over it with her lawnmower, even though it was more than 5 feet past what she claimed to be the property line. We all learned that day that electrical lawnmowers do not interact well with electrified wires. Her mower was completely ruined. Every electrical component was destroyed. She had to purchase an entirely new mower simply because she wanted to be petty and run over our markers. The best part is that since it was so far over the property line, she had no way of trying to blame it on us. She obviously attempted to spread rumors, but they didn't go very far. It would have been too absurd to blame us, so she didn't even try. She never even asked us to buy her a new mower or anything. I guess she knew how we'd respond if she did. Haha. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the story. I have another one coming up about a different situation. How my mother's malicious compliance cost her company over $100 million and led to her entire department being permanently shut down. But it's late, and I'm going to bed. I'll tell that story tomorrow or sometime soon. Be on the lookout for it.